I was raised in a very strict Christian cult that was isolated for the most part from the outside world. I've maybe alluded to this in the past. I've never made a video on it. I kind of told myself I would not ever make this video until after my parents had passed. I didn't want to bring any embarrassment or reproach upon them. But the more that I reflect upon it, the more I think it's appropriate that I do share this, because it really plays into what this video is about and the point that I want to make and wrap up to the end. So I'm going to go ahead and share that with you. Very briefly, was born into a non-denominational Christian cult. I'm not saying cult as that necessarily a bad thing. It was bad and it was good. It was like many things, but that's what it was. And there weren't a tremendous amount of rules in it, but there were a couple that were absolutely, you could not break them. One was we were forbidden to associate, especially make friendships or definitely date or marry anyone outside of the church. Now, when you think of a church by today's standards, most of them are kind of small. This particular one was quite large. There were thousands of attendees, of people there. Just for example, my friend group growing up with the boys that I grew up with, and the group was about a dozen strong, and there were more than that age. That was just the dozen that I really associated with. So it gives you a pretty good idea of the scale of it all. So rule number one was you did not associate with anyone outside of the church. Rule number two was absolutely no doctors, no hospitals, nothing. You never go to a hospital for anything. And that means having your broken bones set by the elders. You just dealt with it in-house the best you could. We lost a lot of girls in childbirth, including my first cousin, who was very close to me. She died because of this rule, right? I mean, nothing's guaranteed. Childbirth there's always risks in it, but when you don't have access to modern, I guess, medicine, the risks are as they were 100 years ago. And that proved to be the case in my experience. So when I was I guess I was probably in my early 20s or so when I finally left. And I'm not going to go into the reasons why I left. I'm not going to badmouth the church, because I may have looked at it that way. I may have been bitter about it, maybe 20 years ago, but now I'm not. Actually, just the opposite. I'm actually quite grateful for the experience it brought me. Because what it brought me was I did not know what it was like to not be surrounded by a tremendous support group. For example, if I would have been, I knew this because I'd seen it happen many times. If I'd have been injured on the job, construction, couldn't work, I would not have had to worry about going without food, going without, not being able to pay my bills. The church always stepped in. The church took care of its own. Another example, if a man needed to tear off his roof and put some new shingles on, he'd put the call out, and you could believe that there'd be 50, 100 guys there with their tool belts ready to work and get this taken care of. This was a common thing, and it was turned into kind of a potluck. The women would cook a potluck meal, and the men would work, and we would eat together. Think of the Amish without the antiquated clothing and the buggies, using modern technology. It was very, very similar to that, just not quite as dogmatic. So I just wanted to set the stage for that. So, not knowing any different and growing up with that, surrounded by my friends all the time, and good friends that I'd never not known, friends that I grew up in the cradle with. By the time I was 17, 18, 19, we were spending all of our time together, hunting and fishing, and I just didn't know any different. It was just the way that it was. And all of these guys, almost all of them, were extremely capable. Furthering your education or going to college, I wouldn't say that there was a rule against it, but it was certainly discouraged. I only knew of one of the guys that I grew up with that actually went to college, and he was kind of looked down upon for that. But the guys were heavily in the trades, a lot of constructions, just a lot of really capable guys. I mean, to be honest with you, and this may sound extreme, but in my friend group and in the I guess the family and the church that I grew up in, it was nothing to blow up your engine on your 67 Chevelle, work all night with 3 or 4 friends, rebuild the engine and put it in and be going back and driving it to work on Monday. Or transmissions, it was common. This is the type of skills that guys had. You went through life not really worrying about too much, knowing that there would always be someone that had your back to come in and to give a helping hand if you needed it. And you knew that you were willing to do that. Many a night I went over and sat up with folks that were sick. And I'm not saying that I'm a saint. I'm just saying that's what everybody did. You just helped out, and it was an incredible community in that aspect. Well, for various reasons that I'm not going to get into because it's not important to the story, I wore out my welcome there. Not at all. I'll say that the church did treat me unfairly in some aspects, but I also brought a lot of it upon myself too. So anyway, all of this came to a head when I was in my probably 21, 22, somewhere around there. I don't remember exact dates, but I ended up leaving and washing my hands from it and vowing never to go back. The problem when you left that church, you were cut off completely. If you were to see someone, even one of those friends, and this happened to me many times because I lived in the area for a while, so you couldn't help but run into folks and friends and acquaintances that you'd always known, they would turn their backs on you, or they would leave, or it just was obvious that you were essentially a black sheep and it had been written off as dead. I know of folks that when they left, and it was rare for anyone to leave in those days, but that left, they were even cut off from their own direct family, even their own children and brothers and sisters and mother and father, that completely wrote them out of their lives. You know, that's a heavy thing when you have never been separated from the collective, when you've never not known the collective and the group, to have that support structure and then make decision to leave that and be completely isolated on your own, living in a world around and amongst people that don't care about you, and wouldn't, by most cases, wouldn't lift a hand to help you if you were in need. So I did what I did, and I made my decision, and I left this, and I was completely isolated and completely on my own for the first time in my life. Well, I think for some people, when you finally are released from all of the shackles and the rules and everything that kind of keeps a Christian religious cult together, when you're free from all of that, you can have a tendency to go off the rails, and which I did. And I'm lucky to be here today, to be honest, to be talking to you. I personally can't really get high and mighty about folks that I see homeless or bums, whatever you want to call them, on the side of the street. Because I have made decisions. I have been there before. I can't say I was living on the streets, but I was close to it. One or two different decisions in a different matter could have tipped the scales to put me in that lifestyle. When I see those guys now, I just think, there go I, if not for the glory of God, right? So, fast forward to where we're at now. When I guess, finally started trying to get my act together, that was about the time that I met Mrs. W. I was kind of just trying to get back on the straight and narrow and trying to figure out and get my life going. I realized then how lonely it was out in the world and how difficult it was to get something established when you didn't have that support structure that you grew up with. And so that, I guess, I'm only now kind of exploring this psychologically. That created in me, I guess, a very determined, resolved, steel will to make life happen and to make it happen on my terms. And I didn't think of this at the time, and I probably didn't even think of this a week ago. But thinking now, I probably, maybe that someone telling me that I couldn't do something or taking everything away from me, rather than break me, it put a resolve in me to be as independent and self-reliant as I possibly could. to just be the opposite of what I grew up in. And I think that was kind of what really drove me. And it was a very personal, very internal challenge. I never, ever thought about, I can't wait to be doing well in life and have my revenge upon these people, and I want them to see how they didn't break me and how they weren't able to destroy my life like so many of the other folks that were able to get out of that environment and who have not done well. I don't care. I don't wish them ill will. I don't wish them well. I just don't care. To be honest with you, I look forward to have my own life now. But I guess, maybe that was what really drove me to be self-sufficient and self-reliant. And about that time when I'm kind of coming into that, when with the idea and being exposed to the idea of living in the country and having backup generators and water purification and your own irrigation and all this stuff, this really fanned those flames of motivation and desire to be self-reliant. And I rode that all through the debacle with the off-grid property and the last place, our previous homestead, and building that all up. And you guys many of you have been with me from the beginning and have ridden along and have been part of that whole thing. Well, I mentioned this, I think maybe a year ago or so when we moved, and it was such a crazy thought to so many people because we had put so much work and time and money and effort into the old property, and it really was a good standalone property. It was a good place to ride out the end of the world, right? But what I started to realize, and it may have been from the upbringing that I had, is no matter how much ammo I had and how many freeze-dried food and gasoline storage and all this stuff, what I was really vulnerable was being alone and being isolated and not having any backups. I mean, I had my neighbor Jeff, the real Martian. We kind of had each other, but that was only two of us, and he was quite a ways away, and we weren't really on the same page with everything at that time. So I felt myself very vulnerable there, and realizing the type of work that I do, one chainsaw injury, one back injury, would put all this responsibility upon my wife, and she's not up to the task to step into my shoes. It's just not her role in life, right? It's my job to be protector. It's not her job to be protector. She'd do what she has to do, but she's not as qualified as I am. And I thought, man, my arrogance and my pride, thinking that me against the world out here in the country, is this is foolish. This is foolish to think that it's arrogant to think that I could actually do anything out here. I was in a very vulnerable position. Well, that got me thinking, and really was kind of the motivation to move to the new location that we're at now. And now we've been here almost a year or so, and it really takes kind of a year or so just to finally get yourself calmed down, unpacked, settled, where you can have a little bit of peace and where you can actually start doing some real thinking again. So now that I'm established and I've got a little time and doing the thinking, I realize what I need and what we need, I'm speaking to us as corporately here, is we need other men. We need a support structure if we're going to survive and thrive in the new future. So without going into too many details, I resolved last night to put together a group of friends, of men that are similar age to me. Most of them are a little bit younger than I am. Family men, well-established men that I know very well. That I know their past, I know their families, I've been in their homes, I trust them. I guess it comes down to there's a group of men that I trust, the most trusted men that I have in my life. And I contacted each and every one of them this morning and set up a time where we're going to get together, and we're going to be getting together monthly. And I want to rebuild and recreate this environment that I was raised in. Now, I don't need to go into all the details of why this is important. I'll give a couple of interesting historical examples. We know in the Old Testament, Abraham, he had a personal army. Did you know that? He had a personal army of 300 men that were equipped and ready at a moment's notice to do whatever Abraham, their commander, willed them to do. And there was a particular time where he had to utilize his army. We all know the story, or those of us that are people of the book know the story. Abraham and his cousin Lot were herdsmen. They had they were cattle ranchers, or sheep ranchers, cattle ranchers. They ranched everything. But their families began to get so big, and their herds and their flocks so big, that the men started to compete for resources, and there started to fights breaking out between the two groups, and it started to get ugly. Well, Abraham and Lot became aware of this and got together and said, look, we're going to have to do something about this. This is going to get ugly. And Abraham, being a very magnanimous man, said, look, there's lots of land here. There's the area here that's close to the city of Sodom, and it's well watered. It's got lots of good green grass. That would be a spot. There's a place over here to the west that also would work. I'll tell you what, you choose whichever one you want, and you can have that, and I'll take my family and I'll go to whatever one you don't want, right? So Lot looked upon that and chose the best for himself, and Abraham said, that's fine, we'll go our separate ways. Well, some time passed, and a marauding band and army came and besieged the city and took Lot and his whole family and all of his possessions captive, carried them off as spoils of war. Abraham caught wind of this, fielded his 300-man army, and set out to rescue his cousin and his family and their possessions. And he did. He routed the army. Not only did he rout them, but he completely destroyed them and took everything that they had taken from Lot and the people of the city. Tremendous riches. Not only that, but he also took all the children and the women. When he returned from war victorious and reestablished his cousin and reestablished their family and all their possessions, they didn't lack for anything, the men that he defeated came to him under a white flag with their hat in their hand. And they said to Abraham, look, you defeated us fair and square. We're not asking for anything back, but would you please give us our families back? Would you please give us our wives and our children back? You can keep all of our possessions. And you know what Abraham did? He said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do anything that would cause you guys to be able to have any sort of an excuse about me being unfair or a tyrant in this land. Not only will I give you back your family members, but I'll also give you back all of your possessions, less the food and supplies that the men have eaten on their way back. Why did Abraham do that? Now, maybe you should go read it and figure that out for yourself. That's not what this is about. But we have an example of a man that was able to field a private army. Very interesting. Another example, and I'm going to speak to those of you, every time I talk about this, and being a man of faith, being a man of the book myself, I'll always get someone that will come in when I talk about these type of things that'll say, no, you need to turn the other cheek. A Christian man needs not be taking up arms and doing anything like that. That's against the teachings of Christ. That's not true. Anyone who says that is ignorant of their Bible, and don't pay any attention to them. The Christian religion, the unadulterated, unfiltered Christian religion is a fighting man's religion. This soft soap that you maybe have experienced in our modern Western churches is not Christianity. And I'll tell you right now, if you are warming a pew in a church that shut down for the pestilence or mandated any sort of a peculiar dress code for the pestilence, you need not be in that church. You need to leave it, and you need to tell the leadership why. If they shut down for this and they adopted dress codes to accommodate, then I would say, for me and my family, that's not something that I would want to have anything to do with. let's get to the point. We're dancing around in a minefield here, aren't we? Let me collect my thoughts here for a minute and we'll wrap this up. I'm not saying that I want to, or anyone should, put together a 300-man army. That would be ridiculous. But what I'm saying is it would be very nice to have a good group. If you could start with 3, I like to see the number 12 or somewhere in between there. Capable men that you knew, that you trusted implicitly, that were reliable, faithful Christian men that are like-minded. How nice would it be to have that group set up, established, and at your disposal and at each other's disposal for times where you might need some help? Let me give you some examples. How about a tree falls down and pokes a hole in your roof and storm's coming? Would it be nice to be able to get on the phone or text, call your group, have 12 guys with nail bags and ladders and tarps and such to be able to deal with that? Or what if come home from vacation and your plumbing burst and you got 3 feet of water in your basement? Would it be nice to have some help over there for something like that? I heard a story not long ago of a man, you're gonna have to kind of read between the lines here, but a man that had a bad fight or breakup or something with his wife. Well, she lied on him and called the police and said that he had threatened to delete himself. Well, he was a kind of a SECONAM, type of guy, and when she lied about him, she mentioned this, that he could potentially be dangerous. Well, he got wind of this, and when they came to take all that he had this friend group established, and there were, he was ex-military, there were a half a dozen or so guys that were not willing to let that happen. And when the authorities showed up, that did not happen. And so that's another example. So all I'm saying is it wouldn't be a bad idea to kind of put that idea, that mindset that I'm going to be a lone wolf and I'm going to do everything myself, put that nonsense aside and maybe get serious about this and some plans on the table. Establish some things. For example, it would be nice if your friend group, at a minute's notice, would be able to grab their tool belt with their tools intact and everything standardized, so that, let's say that my nail gun, I ran out of nails and we were doing sheeting on the roof. My buddy in my friend group, he happened to have those same 16 penny sinkers that maybe I forgot to bring him, where we would all be on the same page, not running a nail gun of a different manufacturer or different nail size that wouldn't be compatible. That wouldn't be good at all. And job sites, some guys have some pretty big properties. How nice would it be to be able to have to be able to communicate? If you were, let's say, fixing a broken well pump on the back 40, and you needed to kind of keep an eye on stuff over there, and you had a guy over here that was running the circuits, it'd be nice to be able to communicate with these radios. And if he showed up and he had these, that's one less thing to worry about, right? So it wouldn't be a bad idea for each guy in this group to have his own kit very well established that was standardized ahead of time, so that you could be effective if need be, if the storm came and you needed to fix a roof, right? For example. That's what I'm saying. And I'll close with this. What's going to come up, I know a lot of people are isolated, especially after everything that we've been through over the last 18 months or so, and don't even know where to start. And they say, oh, I don't even know 3 reliable, like-minded guys. I wouldn't even know where to begin. I know for me, and I think a lot of other people, and I've heard some other folks mention this as well, this is not a unique idea to me, but maybe a good place to go for something like that would be a volunteer fire department. I've volunteered with several different fire departments, and they do seem to attract a particular type of guy that's very, has a lot in common with things that I like to do as well. I'd look into that. I probably would ease into it. Spend a few months. Keep your ears open and listen. You'll hear comments and different things, and you'll find guys that might have similar interests as you, and that would be a good place to start. And I would start by having similar talk that I'm having here today. Wouldn't be a bad idea, also to really be thinking about vehicles. If your buddy calls you and he's got a branch through his roof in the middle of the night, you want to make sure you had plenty of gas in your truck, right? You want to make sure that you had appropriate work clothing. If you needed to spend out all night, watching over a buddy's till the power came back on, would be nice to have all that worked out ahead of time. Maybe some rain gear, rain hats. You know where I'm going with this, right? Standardization and being on the same page, I think, is going to be really, really important in the future. And also having predetermined how far a guy's willing to go, and also having the resolve and the backbone to draw a line in the sand and adhere to it. And if you haven't done that, and you haven't, as a collective group, and had this conversation with your group of like-minded men, then you need to do that. You need to all be on the same page and committed. Jesus, I'll close with this. Jesus, he had, in his last days, he had very little time. He knew what was coming. He had very little time to prepare his disciples for a great challenge, great persecution of the early church. It's important to go back and to read that time in history and what it was that was important to him, because he had, with that little amount of time, it was important to him to get those last messages across to the disciples. Excuse me. One of the things that he said was, when you go out to spread the gospel, you make sure that you're armed. And you make sure that you go out in at least pairs, but better than pairs is 3. He says a 3-strung cord, or a cord that is woven together, is very, very strong and difficult to break. And he makes the analogy of a group of 3 men that are resolved and motivated and equipped can accomplish a lot. I would not relish going up against 3 such men that were motivated with a purpose, resolved and dedicated to see that purpose through. A 3-cord rope is not easily broken. That's the point that I want to make. So, I want you to know that this is not already something that's established. I am starting from the beginning here, just like you are. And I want you to start thinking about this, and I want you to start making this happen. And also, don't forget, I think this is the most, I do get criticized from this from time to time, and I don't mean to leave it out. Sometimes I just can't always say what's on my mind. Sometimes some things I think are just a given when they're not necessarily communicated that way. Put God first in your life and make sure you partner with Him and spend time with Him and seek His counsel. And also, I think it's important for this group, and whatever faith you may be, that you, birds of a feather flock together. That you lay out the fundamental things that are important to you, the lines in the sand that you are unwilling to cross, and make sure that everyone's on the same page, and make these very clear up front. And explain this. And if a man is not willing to give you an oath and to commit to this, to the death, then this is not the group for him. So whatever that may be, just keep that in mind and be very selective. And I would say 3 trusted friends is better than 20 that you don't know where their allegiance is. Goodness, sorry about that. Thanks for watching. May God bless you and your families. Remember that we're on the winning side and that we're on the right side of history. And don't be afraid. Do what you can. Be diligent. Be sober-minded. keep your eyes open, prepare, trust God, and prepare for the greatest show in the history of man. We'll see you guys on the next video.
I want to put on the whole armor of God and come out fighting with fresh fire, that I can be counted worthy to be numbered among the New Testament saints.